Welcome to It's About Time, and thank you for watching us. Today, we're taking a climb up one of the most famous fairy tales in history. Jack and the Beanstalk. What was hidden, removed, and adapted in the story during the 1800s, and why? And trust me, the answer reveals not just the story's roots, but also some of the bizarre and unsettling facts about children's stories in that century. What is Jack and the Beanstalk about? The story we have been told is this. Jack lives with his widowed mother. They're very poor, with nothing left but their cow. His mother sends Jack to market to sell it for food. On the way, Jack meets a mysterious stranger who offers him a handful of magic beans in exchange for the cow. Jack, being naive and curious, agrees. When he brings the beans home, his mother is furious. She throws them out the window and sends Jack to bed without supper. Overnight, the beans grow into a towering beanstalk that reaches the sky. Jack climbs it and finds himself in a strange land above the clouds. At the top, Jack discovers a giant's castle. Inside lives a fearsome giant who bellows, "Fee, fee, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." Each time Jack sneaks into the castle, he steals one of the giant's treasures, gold coins, golden eggs, and a magical harp. Eventually, the giant realizes Jack is the thief. Jack rushes down the beanstalk with the giant in pursuit. He calls to his mother for an axe, chops the beanstalk, and the giant falls to his death. With the treasures, Jack and his mother live happily ever after, no longer poor. But here's where the 1800s come in. The story wasn't always told this way. In fact, it didn't even have the same moral message. So, where did Jack come from? The first major printed version of Jack and the Beanstalk appears in 1807, published by Benjamin Tabart, a London bookseller. Tabart's version wasn't just a simple fairy tale. It was a carefully packaged piece of moral education. The original story, which traveled by word of mouth, shows Jack as a poor thief and murderer, a colonizer and a criminal. The giant never wronged Jack, initially. That was added to justify the theft. It also used to have elements of poverty-related cannibalism on Jack's mother, which have been removed. Finally, to protect the obedient women of the era from any rebellious thoughts, they also removed the parts where the giant's wife was helping Jack secretly in his plan against the giant, her husband. The 1800s was the era when publishers started reshaping folklore into safe lessons for children and hiding hideous facts about heroes and giants, and it has to do with the way society changed during the Industrial Revolution, when social reformers worried about how children were being raised. In this sense, Jack was a paradox. On one hand, he's a poor boy, reckless enough to sell a cow for beans. On the other hand, he succeeds, and he gets rich by stealing. How do you spin that into a moral? Publishers in the 1800s had to work hard to reshape the story. Some made Jack a righteous avenger. Others made him an example of divine providence. God himself had supposedly destined Jack to climb the beanstalk. The giant. Now, let's pause on the giant for a moment. The line, "Fee, fee, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman," is actually much older than the 1800s. It goes back at least to the 16th century, possibly earlier, as history shows similar tales all over the globe, going as far back as 5,000 years ago, about cannibal giants and poor children. The version most people know comes from Jack and the Beanstalk, first popularized in the 18th and 19th centuries, but the rhyme itself is much older. The earliest printed version appears in a play from 1595 called Jack the Giant Killer. Even earlier, scholars believe it echoes Old Celtic and Norse chants, where rhythmic nonsense syllables were often used in spells or incantations. By the Victorian period, the rhyme had softened. In children's books, it became less about violence and more about fun. Giants were scary, yes, but also clumsy and comical. The chant transformed into a kind of theatrical catchphrase, much like a monster's roar in a modern movie. So in a way, the chant has traveled from ancient spell to symbol of national danger to a family-friendly verse. Next time you hear a giant thunder, fee fi fo fum, remember, you're listening to a piece of folklore that's been echoing through history for over 400 years. But the giant was also a cannibal. In many versions, he actually eats human flesh. And here's the strange twist. While publishers cleaned up many fairy tales to protect children, they often left cannibalism intact. Why? Because it was a clear symbol of evil. For Victorians, violence was acceptable in a children's story if it was framed as a punishment for wickedness. The tale was so popular that by the mid-1800s, Jack and the Beanstalk had become a staple of Victorian stage plays. These pantomimes were bawdy, comic, and full of social satire, not at all the clean-cut moral tales you'd expect. Jack was both a role model for children and a clownish figure for adults to laugh at as a petty thief. There's another layer here. Jack's story is about climbing, stealing, and rising above your station. In a class-obsessed society like 19th century England, this theme had power. Jack wasn't a prince. He wasn't royal. He was a poor boy who dared to reach higher, literally into the sky. So what do we learn when we climb the beanstalk back into the 1800s? We see that fairy tales were not static. They were shaped by the anxieties, morals, and even the politics of the time. Jack and the Beanstalk wasn't just entertainment. It was a mirror of Victorian society, reflecting its fears about class, morality, nationalism, and childhood itself. To summarize the disturbing elements that have been removed in the 1800s, we collected 6 of them as follows. 1. Jack's moral ambiguity. Earlier versions, like those recorded before the 19th century, showed Jack as a trickster or even a thief. In some oral versions, Jack simply robs and kills the giant without much justification. 19th century edits reframed Jack as acting under moral right. The giant had stolen from Jack's father. Jack's thefts and the giant's death were therefore justified. This reframing hid the uncomfortable theme of Jack as an immoral opportunist. 2. Violence and gore. Oral tales often contained graphic violence. The giant eating humans, sometimes described in bloody detail, the beanstalk fall being gruesome, and Jack's theft being more brutal. 19th century children's editions toned down cannibalism, gore, and cruelty. The giant's fee-fi-fo-fum threat of eating boys was softened. Jack's killing of the giant was made less bloody and more necessary. 3. Sexual or adult undertones. In some early folk versions, there are hints of sexual danger or the giant's wife being flirtatious or protective in ways that carried adult implications. These undertones were erased or softened in Victorian versions to make the tale fit a pure children's audience. 4. Jack's family background. In oral and chapbook versions, Jack's family was sometimes depicted as lazy, greedy, or dysfunctional, which made Jack's choices morally ambiguous. In 19th century children's editions, Jack's mother was recast as a poor but respectable widow, and Jack's thefts became heroic acts to restore their rightful inheritance. 5. Class and social order. Earlier tellings sometimes framed the story as a poor trickster outwitting the rich and powerful, the giant representing landlords or authority figures. Victorian editions hid or softened this class struggle by turning the giant into a villain who deserved to lose his wealth rather than a symbol of social inequality. 6. Tone and audience. Pre-19th century versions were often bawdy, coarse, and humorous, meant for adult or mixed audiences. 19th century retellings shifted the tone into moral instruction for children, stripping away jokes, innuendo, and satire. Next time you hear the chant, "Fee fi fo fum," remember, it's not just the voice of a giant, it's the echo of a twisted century and the dark origins of children's literature. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this climb into the history of storytelling, don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and join us again for more tales of history's strangest corners.